Hi, my name is Cookie Batch, and I'm a USA Brevet Judge, and I've been a clinician with USAG clinics at the state, regional, and national level for quite a few years. This past summer, I made a presentation at the Region 8 Congress on how to do presentations. Lynn Motzkovitz of USAG asked me if I would record that session in case it would be helpful to other presenters in the future. So that's what we're going to do today. This session is actually made up of 3 different videos that are in a playlist. The first video focuses on the basic techniques for presenters. The second video includes capturing video and editing video to enhance your presentation. And the third video in the playlist focuses on some annoying features of PowerPoint that you'll be able to change if you would like to do so. So I hope you enjoy this session, and we're going to go ahead and start with part 1. The title of the presentation is Sharpen Your Presentation Skills, and it will include suggestions for USAG Congress presenters at regional and national congresses. Some of the basic concepts of presentation include confidence, knowledge of your topic, and presentation skills. The latter is particularly important so that you communicate clearly and effectively with your audience. How do you develop confidence? Well, the first thing I think is that you prepare, and you prepare well in advance. You're organized, you rehearse. In fact, you rehearse it over and over again. And then your confidence can really be boosted if you have backup plans in case something goes wrong. The typical concerns we have as presenters is that the technology won't work. The PowerPoint won't advance, the videos won't play like we wanted them to do, or the sound won't work. So you need to have backup plans, and we will address some of those later on. The other way that you can show confidence is that you absolutely love the topic you're presenting. It's something that you really want to teach. If you've ever been asked to do a presentation and you haven't really loved it, you know that it can be a struggle to make it interesting. So hopefully you have selected or been asked to make a presentation on a topic that you really are passionate about. You also need to learn to manage your anxiety. And great ways to do that are to practice your breathing techniques as well as to rehearse over and over again. Anxiety is normal, and it is part of the presentation process. I don't think there's any of us who've presented for years and years get over the fact that we're a little bit anxious before the session starts. But one thing to do is breathe and practice until all those ums and ahs go away, and you can work your way through your presentation in a fluid manner. When it comes to knowledge, of course, you really do have to know your topic. That's obvious. But you have to get to know it even better. Even those of us who have been doing this for a long time find that when we make a presentation, we learn something new. We find that something we thought we knew became difficult to explain it in a way that others would understand it. So it kind of forces us to go back and to either look at it, read the rules, observe the technique, and then being able to present that. So don't think that just because you are the expert and you know how to do this, that that's all you have to do. We always have to go back and learn more so that we can do a better job when we make presentations. When you're preparing your topic, you need to develop it so that it's compelling for the audience or that it fills a gap. Think about things like, what are you going to present? Why is that important? Do you know the technology that's required? And if you're going to use videos, where are you going to get these materials? That's the most time-consuming part of making a presentation. So how do you identify a topic? Well, often it's questions that are being asked by a coach or a judge. It could be mistakes that you have made or that you've observed others making. It could be a frustration that coaches or judges talk about, and as you listen to them, you realize that you may have something that would be helpful to them in reducing that frustration. And likewise, it could be observations while you're at a meet. You're observing the coaches or you're observing the judges, and you think, I think there's a better way to do this. Then you can make that your topic for your presentation, and it will be something that will captivate your audience then. One of the reasons that I suggest starting early with planning your presentation is that you really never know what's going to happen in your life. So as I was preparing to record this session, Hurricane Milton came right at Tampa Bay, where I live. Now, if I had been waiting to prepare my videos, I would really have been in a pickle because we didn't know if we were going to have electricity or not. And in addition to that, there's always a lot of things that come up in people's lives, family emergencies, your work obligations. So it really is helpful to prepare your session well in advance so that you don't have to worry about any of these unusual situations that come up and affect your personal schedule. You need to focus on your target audience and the purpose. So, for example, if you're preparing something for coaches, that's different than preparing something for judges. We use different language sometimes. Judges use shorthand, coaches tend not to use shorthand. So, you need to be sure that you're focusing on the target audience and reinforce what the purpose is of your presentation. And then, of course, the other reason, as I mentioned, to start early is it does take time to select your graphics and your videos. I mentioned before that you have to know your topic and you have to keep knowing it. I found as judging, I pretty much know the rules and I apply them, but when I'm preparing that presentation, I always go back and check the code of points to make sure that I'm accurately portraying what the rule is. Sometimes we get used to saying a rule in a way that makes sense to us or to other judges, or we call a skill a name that's common and known to many coaches and judges, but not universal. And it's not the one that's in the code of points. So in order to communicate clearly, we always have to go back to the code of points or the rules and policies and check and make sure that we're using the exact language. For judges, if you're going to include shorthand in your presentation, be sure and use the official shorthand, not the ones that you've gotten used to using and that work perfectly well when you're judging. But when you're preparing for a presentation, you need to use the symbols that are known universally by all judges. If you'll be showing routines with scores, be sure to ask a couple of your judging friends to judge the routines and send you their scores. It's very easy to make a mistake when we're judging, and it's helpful to have somebody else correct those mistakes before you go to do your presentation. Another suggestion is to prepare your presentation and let it sit for a while. Come back to it after a couple of weeks, review it, and edit it. I'm almost certain you'll find something that you want to change. You may find a mistake, you may just find a simple typo. But after you let it sit for a while and look at it with a fresh eye, then you'll catch those mistakes and you can make those corrections before your presentation. Rehearse your presentation with a friend, then make the edits when your friends ask questions or when they look like they maybe don't understand what you're saying. Now, on the day of your presentation, you'll certainly want to arrive early and test the equipment. This is probably the highest anxiety producing moment for any presenter because our presentations are so technology dependent that if the technology doesn't work, we're really in a pickle. So get there and test it early. There's generally somebody around who's a technical expert who can help you fix any problems you have. One of the things that is helpful is that if you could get off the stage as quickly as possible so that the next presenter can begin their preparations. If it's not possible, at least step aside to get out of the way of all the technical connections so that the next presenter can be prepared for the time of their presentation. Be sure to practice with the microphone and adjust it for your voice and your room size. And again, if you have any trouble, the technical person on staff will be able to help you resolve those. This is really important. If you need sound, be sure you have requested that in advance. This is an additional expense in most cases for the organization, so they need to know in advance so they can order it for your room or so they can put you in a room that has the connections to the amplifier. You need to test the amplifier and the volume before your session starts. And once again, then you can get some technical help if you need it. Some additional suggestions for your presentation are to bring a backup copy of your presentation on external devices. You can bring those on a flash drive or an external hard drive, but sometimes your computer simply won't connect. And if you have it on an external drive, you can borrow somebody else's computer and it will probably work on a different device. I also always like to print a PDF copy of the slides just in case something goes wrong. Worst case scenario, I could look at the PDF and talk about my presentation if the PowerPoint won't work. But then that means that you would have to have your video clips separate on your drive or your external drive. So that's another reason to bring that external drive. I also like to upload mine to a share drive. I use Google Drive. And that way, in case something's wrong, I can always download a copy from the Google Drive. You can also show it directly from Google Drive, but that usually doesn't show up as well and you don't have as much control. So I like to just download it and then you have an extra copy. Your demeanor is really important when you're making your presentation. It's best if you can use a conversational tone rather than a lecture tone. If you focus on the fact that you're teaching or explaining something, how would you explain that to a person if you were sitting with them one by one? Just because you're on a stage presenting to hundreds of people doesn't mean that you have to have a different voice or a different demeanor. Your purpose there is to teach and to explain. So just think, how would I explain this to my good friend? It's always helpful to have a pleasant facial expression and, of course, to be respectful of the audience and the questions that they ask. In contrast, this would be the demeanor that we don't enjoy. The person who's overly officious, arrogant, intimidating, and disrespectful. We've probably all come across somebody like that when we were in school or in some lecture, and obviously that's not the demeanor that will help you be an effective presenter. So some suggestions for your presentation: do speak slowly, speak in complete sentences. Don't assume that your audience knows what you're coming from. You know where you're coming from, but they may not. So be sure and give the introduction to whatever concept you're going to address, and then explain what it is in relation to that context. And as we said, breathe in between sections. Some things that I find are better not to say: don't stand up and say, I'm scared, or, I don't really know much about this topic. They asked me to do it, but I'm just not really sure. Or say, gosh, it's the first time I've done this. I'm really scared. All those things may be true, but if you present yourself with confidence, that will aid your interaction with the audience. Here's another suggestion for your presentation. I've found that there's a few words and phrases to avoid so that you aren't inadvertently insulting your audience or saying something that will cause them to not concentrate on what you're saying, but they'll be annoyed because of the way you said it. One is, be careful not to use jokes that might belittle the performer, the team, or the coach. So even though you may want to say something about an athlete that's said in good humor and good nature, think about it if that athlete were in the room and heard you say that, or if the parent of that athlete was in the room and heard you say that. Would they think it was as funny as you think it is? In women's gymnastics, obviously, we have a lot of young girls in our sport, but those young girls grow and become athletes at the high school and the collegiate level. At a certain point in time, the use of the word girls is not always welcomed by these individuals when they're at older ages. So I found it's better to use the word athletes or gymnasts when you're talking about your athlete as opposed to saying the girl. If you're a judge, avoid using the word we get to take a certain deduction. We don't like to take any deductions. We have to take those deductions if we see them. Saying that we get to take them makes it sound like, wow, I finally got to take a deduction on her. And that's, of course, not how we are actually thinking when we're judging. And something else to avoid is that unless your audience is a gymnast, avoid saying that you will get a 3/10 deduction. Say the gymnast will receive a deduction for that mistake. And then here's one that we really are trying to make a change in, and you hear it on TV all the time. The commentators will say, the judges are looking for this. Well, that's true. Of course, the judges are looking for the performance quality of the athlete. However, what's really happening is the judges are applying the rules. So it's preferred to say the rules require that the gymnast have a 180-degree split in her leaps and jumps. What's the difference? One makes it sound like the emphasis is on the judges. And of course, as we know, the emphasis is on the athletes and the application of the rules. So it takes the emphasis off of the judges and places it where it should be on the rules. For your presentation, don't read the slides verbatim. And if you make a mistake, just admit it, but don't waste a lot of time explaining that. We all make mistakes when we're presenting. Just correct the mistake and move on. Otherwise, you take a lot of time kind of explaining away that mistake, and really it's time that you could use better by teaching your subject matter. If you're using a microphone, I'd suggest not walking away from the microphone. As you do that, it's obviously could be hard for the audience to hear you. But also, even if it's one of the handheld microphones that you can walk around with, sometimes you move that away from your face and then people can't hear it. Avoid too much pacing. It's a wonderful style to be able to get out from in front of the podium and to walk around and make some eye contact. That really does enliven the presentation. You won't often have that luxury when you have large numbers of people in the room, but do avoid too much pacing because that does interfere with the quality of your presentation when people see you walking back and forth and turning your back on them, etc. And then, of course, we're always trying to engage your audience, and you can do that with multiple techniques. You can ask them questions, you can ask them to show their hands, you can ask them how many agree with you, how many have ever had this problem, but find ways to keep them with you and engage them in the presentation so they're actively involved in the learning process. Another important thing to think about in advance is how do you want to handle questions from the audience? Ideally, I like to handle those questions as they come up. But what I have learned is that when you're in a large session and you have a limited amount of time, that tends to use up a lot of time simply because the questions are sometimes not always on target, and then it takes you off target. So you can try to do that if that works because it is very effective. However, you can take them at the end of the session and just tell people that we'd like you to hold your questions until the end, and then you'll take all of the questions that you have time for. That ensures that you actually get through your entire presentation. You then will have time to take the questions. Some people like to ask for questions on paper, and you can have someone review those questions for you. And perhaps it might be something that the answer needs to have reviewed and double checked in the code of points. So that's always an effective technique to make sure that you get the correct answers. Something else about you asking a question of the audience, you may find that nobody wants to raise their hand. Nobody wants to answer. If that happens, try waiting out the silence before you answer. Often, if you give them long enough, someone will get the courage and they'll raise their hand, and then you'll be able to get an answer from someone in the audience so that you can have a little bit of dialogue with them. Finally, prepare a closing statement. I don't know if you've seen presenters get to the end of their slide presentation and then they go, well, that's it. I guess that's all I got, you know? So prepare a closing statement. Something like, that concludes my presentation. Thank you for coming. It's pretty simple, but it's a way to let your audience know that you are finished. The next topic will focus on part 2 and part 3 of this session, which is capturing and editing video. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.